All right, we're right at 11, so we'll kick this off. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this live session. We'll introduce this panel, but most of us are on the Data Provenance Standards Technical Committee through OASIS Open. We're excited to be here with you today. Thank you to all the panelists that are joining and giving their time today. Mary Beth, next slide, please. So we're excited to talk to you about these data provenance standards. This committee has been doing a lot of great work in the last year or so. As everyone on this call knows, there's lots of regulation, laws, acts coming out about data quality standards, data provenance standards. It's really important to understand where your data is coming from and what you can use it for. These standards will be a great tool for organizations across all industries to use and implement. So we're excited to introduce this new tool to you guys. Throughout the session today, we've got an hour. We'll be doing a 45-minute presentation followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Throughout the whole session, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. All panelists will be able to see them, and we'll go through them at the end of the session. Feel free to submit them throughout the entire session, though. You're welcome to. This presentation is also being recorded and will be made available to members after we're done. Next slide, please. And we'll go through and introduce our great panelists that are here with us today. I'll start. I'm your moderator today. My name is Kate Gallo. I'm the marketing lead at Blue Street Data. And I'll hand it off to Bryan, and then Mike, Andy, and Fotis. You can just unmute whenever it's your turn.
Hi, I'm Bryan Bortnick. I'm the Data Governance Counsel at IBM.
I'm Mike Colaresi. I'm the Director of the Hub for AI and Data Science Leadership at the University of Pittsburgh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Hanna. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Blue Street Data.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Fotis Psallidas, and I'm the architect of Fabric IQ at Microsoft.
Thank you all. We also have Lisa Bobbitt from Cisco on for Q&A at the end. So feel free to submit questions to any of these panelists individually or the whole group. And again, we'll be sure to answer them at the end of the session. Next slide, please. So going through our agenda for today, all of the organizations you just heard are part of the team that are within our technical committee here at OASIS. You'll hear about the other organizations that are part of our committee as well. But everyone on this call has been really crucial to developing these standards. We're going to start going over what provenance is, get a lay of the land, and why it's vital for AI and privacy. We'll go through then a clear overview of these new technical standards and goals, so everyone has a good understanding of the work that this group has done up to this point, what these standards can be used for, and why they're important. We'll walk through learning how to implement provenance without disrupting existing systems. So any new tool you're implementing, it's really important that it doesn't disrupt your existing workflows and systems. We'll go through how to make sure you can implement these new valuable standards without disrupting anything that you're currently doing and working on. And then we're going to explore a live use case demonstrating measurable ROI and scalability. We'll talk through existing tools that these standards are in use for right now, so you'll get to see them in action live. And next slide, please. I'm going to hand it off to Fotis for this next section.
Thanks much, Kate. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So what is data provenance? So data provenance is a fundamental piece of information that is allowing you to connect your data and your metadata with their origin. Now, this type of information is central to multiple different functions within an enterprise, like privacy, security, governance, accountability, traceability, just to name a few, and so on. So in this direction, the mission and the goal of our technical committee here is to produce a standard of how we represent this information in a way that is both functional, and as you will see, we have based the development of the standard based on multiple real use cases, and also interoperable across multiple different enterprises. So one standard that multiple different enterprises can communicate on. So next slide, please. And in this direction, of course, we're really happy to have multiple sponsor members, including Blue Street Data, Cisco, Dell, Dentons, Huawei, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, and Red Hat. Next slide, please. All right, so why data provenance and data provenance standards really matter? So it is really the case that if we have consistent data provenance standards, we can enable transparency and accountability. We can also be able to verify the lineage with metadata oversight. And finally, we can also reduce the risk of misuse and ensure compliance overall. And with that, back to you, Kate, and the whole team to discuss how we realize this vision and goal as part of this technical committee and standard.
Thank you, Fotis. I'm going to hand it off to Andy. So thanks, Fotis, again for walking through sort of why data provenance matters. Andy's going to walk us through a little bit more about these standards and give us an overview of what they are and how they were formed.
Yeah, I thanks, Kate, and again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and those of you watching live and on the recording. So here they are. So this is the baseline. When we talk about data provenance standards, there are 22 specific fields that we've developed as a committee, and they center around three pillars: source, provenance, and use. You can see them listed here on the right-hand side, but just to say a few words about each of these. Source, as you might expect, is very easily tied back to who's the issuer of the data set, internal or external. What's the title? What's the description? I like to think about the data provenance standards as building a deeper relationship with your data. When we think about traditional quality metrics, I always think about that sort of like a judgment or having a perspective on that data. Whereas a data provenance standards helps us understand them at a deeper level. And how do we build a relationship with that data? And that really sinks into provenance, right? So what is the origin of that data? From a geography perspective, what's the issue date? How often is it refreshed? The generation methods. So understanding where did this data come from? That is the center of everything that we've been working on at the data at OASIS and with the data provenance standards. The use is the third piece, and this is where we all tend to get a little bit tied up at times when we don't know the provenance of the data. Are we able to use it? Do we have consent to use it in a way that we want to use it? What is the intended use of that data? What are our licensing rights, privacy enhancing technologies? What's the confidentiality related to this? Knowing all this by data set helps us with that relationship with the data. It makes it very straightforward, as you can see the fields on the right-hand side. So that when we can combine this provenance along with traditional quality metrics, especially completeness and accuracy, we get this much deeper trust of the data. Mary Beth, next slide, please. So how did this all happen? And I think in 2024, the Data and Trust Alliance had announced the data provenance standards through work with about 26 to 30 different large organizations and some small organizations across the country. And about a year or so ago, all that work was contributed to our technical committee here at OASIS Open, where we use as a foundation in terms of building these data provenance standards. And it was very collaborative in its development. Our tenets were it had to be open, it had to have cross-industry input, be very neutral. The only way that we could do that is through lots and lots of interviews, deep dives across industries, and understanding what was important from a provenance perspective. And above that, we needed to make sure that we were designing the standards so that they could be scalable. Interoperability was really important. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, but also ease of adoption. We know that anything that's complicated or too structured in a way that is limiting hinders adoption. And that's why as you get to learn more about what we're doing, you'll see that we've also developed use cases around the standards. And Bryan's going to talk about one coming up. We've developed curriculum or methodology around curriculum for the data provenance standards. Mike will talk about that a little bit later. And we're all already seeing technology being developed to help with that ease of adoption. So not only do we want this to be broad and open, but we wanted to make sure that we were focused on adoption. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about that interoperability that I mentioned before. Mary Beth, next slide, please. Okay, so this was a very important focal point for the group. We wanted to make sure that what we were developing was interoperable. We wanted everybody to be able to speak the same language across an organization, across units, across technology platforms, across geographic borders. So that first banner that you see there, open, readable framework that allows to be easily moved throughout those different parts of the organization and beyond. Flexibility was really important to us. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't rigid in how we were developing this, that it was a solution where use was easy. So it allowed us, if you take data set A and B, they were able to be very easily work together, but also A plus C. So it wasn't something that was specific to any one individual data set. And when you have a structure like that, you can now think about those that are generating these data sets, either internally or externally. And you can design the data sets to have this metadata already included in that data set, which then speeds up integration. That middle piece here, tool agnostic, right? So we did not want and integrate into existing workflows. Kate mentioned this at the top of the presentation, which is workflows can't be disrupted. We know that if you put something into place that's going to disrupt workflows, that is going to be hard to adopt, or there will be resistance to adoption. And so that tool agnostic, easy to integrate concept was very important to us. Lastly, we wanted to make sure that this metadata enabled faster decisions, right? So it doesn't, we can have the information available to us about the data set that allows us to make the decisions without significant hesitation. And that, so these three pieces of our process around interoperability were essential. Mary Beth, next slide, please. So what we wanted as the outcome or the output was to make sure that we were able to articulate the benefits of adopting these standards. And we've tested this through our discussions, through use cases, or understanding what are the benefits. If you adopt these standards, what should you expect within the organization? I'm sort of going to combine the first two and the second two. But when we think about having this information that we trust and can rely on, it's going to lower the cost of data use in a number of different ways. It's going to make it easier to procure it and to integrate it. So think about the amount of time that you often take to do the diligence around a data set, or onboard the data set, or integrate the data set. All these processes will get faster. There will be less resources needed in order to integrate this data. So adoption of those standards leads to that. That lower cost of data use, I would even extend that into, and I'm going to give an example of this, but it's going to make your choice of what vendor to use or what provider to use in terms of an external data set different, easier. I'm going to give an example of that, so I'm going to hold on that and finish the slide with that. The next two, not surprisingly, the more that we know about the data set, the more that we can trust it, right? So, and we can make sure that we're using the data in the way that we're authorized to use it, the way that we're licensed to use it. It's incredibly important, especially in the age of AI, where we are being challenged by new and different models all the time in terms of its output and its ethical use of that. So increasing that trust and that understanding, that relationship with the data becomes really important. We want to minimize bad outcomes. We want to minimize hallucinations. And while data is not the only source for those bad outcomes and hallucinations, we know that models play a role in that as well. But we want to make sure that the data supports the objectives of which we're trying to achieve, and that means matching our principles to performance. And Mike will talk a little bit about that in his section. Just real quick before I go on to my last slide, I wanted to mention one example that with our company, we were helping a mid-sized bank purchase data. And as we were looking at which of those vendors adhered to the data provenance standards, it became an easier choice. And the relation, not only did that particular data set that they chose have more metadata around it, they were able to understand the value of the data and pay what they thought was fair value, but they were also more comfortable with the relationship with the vendor because they were providing the necessary information that they needed in order to integrate that data quickly and to be able to trust it in its operation. So I hope you see those benefits that would accrue to you. I think that is my last slide, Kate. So I think maybe we're moving on to Bryan's example at this point.
Yep. Yeah, Mary Beth, next slide, please. One thing just before we move on to this that I want to highlight about what Andy said, those 150 deep dives that the Data and Trust Alliance did to gather information to create these data provenance standards were done across industries. There was a lot of work and effort put into understanding existing workflows and processes and standards being used to adapt these to fit as sort of seamlessly as possible into what your organization and teams are already doing and using. And one of the most exciting things for me about these standards is that they're industry agnostic. So this can be plugged in as a tool, regardless of what industry you're operating in. With that, I'm really excited about this example through IBM. So Bryan, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Kate, and a great explanation there. Hi, everybody. Today, I'm going to present with the goal of gauging interest in the practical adoption of data provenance standards. I'd like to take a few minutes to share how IBM specifically has implemented data provenance by embedding it into our data governance workflows. These workflows form a core part of our AI framework for system and model development and lifecycle management. And in this presentation, I'll look to highlight the impact this has had across our enterprise. As you can see from the flow illustration on this slide, the data used to build, test, and train models directly influences the model's assigned risk profile and its corresponding management lifecycle. Data provenance plays a critical role here. It helps inform and enable both regulatory and corporate compliance in complex and rapidly evolving AI environments. When provenance is captured and leveraged, data quality increases and the risk of unintended use, such as reliance on unlicensed or improperly sourced or pirated data, will significantly decrease. By incorporating data provenance into our intake workflows, we've enabled developers to reliably access trusted data pipelines aligned with IBM's enterprise-wide standardized risk tolerance thresholds and designed to support high-quality, compliant, reliable model development. Now, this strategic alignment has enabled the creation of comprehensive, curated, and annotated data inventories and data processing and use lineage tracking that reinforces our directives for smart discovery and responsible data reuse. It has also supported scaled enablement for strategic AI decision-making and targeted remediation. By embedding data provenance into these workflows, IBM not only understands the data better, but also the rationale behind why specific data is selected and used, strengthening both governance and outcomes. Next slide, please. Thanks. As an early collaborator with DNTA and also OASIS, IBM recognized that these standards need to deliver value to both data creators and AI providers, since successful AI development depends on increasing volumes of high quality but trusted data. Working alongside, as sort of Andy mentioned, a broad set of stakeholders across multiple industries, we developed these intake requirements that were both broad in applicability and meaningful in practice. We then conducted a series of proof of concepts and testing simulations to demonstrate and quantify the potential return on investment from data provenance standard adoption. IBM's testing focused on whether data provenance enables providers to make more informed data choices by increasing transparency into data quality, origin, and rights, and whether this, in turn, accelerates access to trusted data across our enterprise. So in short, we examined whether the data provenance standards could measurably improve data quality and review efficiency. And to the surprise of hopefully no one on this call, the findings reinforced what we already suspected. Data provenance provides a reliable chain of custody. It allows enterprises to track data from its creation, internal or external, through transformation, testing, and deployment. Standardized metadata intake taxonomies streamline the review processes with consistent documentation and descriptors across teams and systems, enabling interoperability across data lakes and previously siloed environments. Data provenance enables consolidated, governance-aligned AI development at an enterprise-wide scale. Now, the Stanford Foundation Model Transparency Index, that's a tongue twister right there, was created by AI researchers to improve the transparency of foundation models. It scores major foundational developers for their transparency on over 100 transparency indicators, including those related to data acquisition, usage, and monitoring. The report noted that while most AI companies are opaque about their training data, their training compute, and post-deployment usage, IBM continues to stand out as a positive outlier, particularly in data acquisition and data properties, which we can lend heavily to the adoption of these data provenance standards. Next slide, please. So for your organization, adoption of data provenance standards should be scaled and tailored to the needs of your enterprise. The key is to focus on the data uses and risks most relevant to your business. At IBM, given the breadth of our operation and adoption was sort of formalized using a data catalog that makes available metadata for previously assessed data sets and enables reuse where appropriate. As shown on this slide, on the left-hand side, IBMers can access this catalog and search using keywords and advanced filtering options designed to support both data provenance standard requirements and IBM-specific use cases. Once suitable data is identified, supported by streamlined diligence based upon the search results and data card details, reuse may be enabled for an IBM user through automated controls that document the lineage and new use case. These same controls ensure appropriate legal oversight, privacy protections aligned with consent, adherence to ethical AI standards, and role and use-based permissions across the company. So if this slide and quick demonstration leaves you with one takeaway, let it be this. Adopting data provenance standards delivers real measurable value. You will see a meaningful return on your investment by aligning on a common provenance framework. We all strengthen our collective ability to safeguard the ecosystem and reduce opportunities for bad actors. Thank you. Back to you, Kate.
Awesome, Bryan. Thank you. And one other thing I'll highlight from what Bryan said, IBM, as you mentioned, was one of the first organizations to begin working with the Data and Trust Alliance on these standards. And like Bryan was saying, based on all of the models and the breadth of things that IBM does, they're a great example of these data provenance standards in practice, seeing the ROI from them. And I'm sure with all of us using IBM tools, also very reassuring to see that we can trust the data being used. So great example. Thank you, Bryan. And I'll hand it off to Mike to talk a little bit more about education around these standards.
Thanks so much. So my part of this is to talk about our budding partnership between OASIS and the University of Pittsburgh in developing curriculum for these data provenance standards. And what we're really interested in is sort of easing the pathway to adoption. And for this, this is a really natural partnership. We believe, because we've been working for the last 2-3 years with companies to identify sort of gaps between data science and AI training and real world use cases and practicality. That led us to create a framework for curriculum, which we call Concrete, Context-Centered Responsible Data Science Training and Exploration. For those of you that might have grown up with like choose your own adventure stories, these are notebook-based kind of choose your own adventure stories where standards, data, models, abstract math, right, aren't just taught in that sort of disembodied setting, but we always place them in real world context, and the learner sort of simulates a realistic role with a business objectives, different realistic trade-offs of what's going on. And we've been building these with the city of Pittsburgh and other organizations in retail and other things in large part to improve our training and workforce development, because we saw this, as a real need and gap that has grown to saying like, how can we use this curriculum sort of to move things forward and really to skate to where the puck is going to be and where organizations need to go, particularly when we're thinking about bringing private internal data like together with modeling AI and other technologies in particular. So that's where we enter this. Like, how can we partner to think about adoption of these data provenance standards? And so what we've done is, you can see the picture here kind of on the right is, we think about a sandbox where in the first case, like we are developing a prototype of these choose your own adventure notebooks where we're like, why would you choose this? And luckily the committee came up with a number of different use cases that we can operationalize. And we can operationalize that in a couple ways. So one is we can take a use case. One is a data procurement officer, like working in health insurance, for example, and they're deciding about whether to sort of take a chance on new data that the data science team is really excited about, but they are less familiar with in particular and don't know, right? Like how that would play with the existing model architecture and other things, as well as like where did it come from and how can it be trusted, particularly for sort of true forecasting or true out of sample forecasting needs and trustworthiness with stakeholders versus just relicensing what they already have. And so we introduce what we think are like realistic trade-offs between the time it would take to check new data and talk to different teams. And so like in this interactive prototype, the person takes on this role, like has a charge, and then can actually talk to a legal team and get advice, a data curator, the data science team about what they're excited about, as well as marketing, and then make different decisions in this sandbox. And the decisions can be actually like bad decisions if they want. And then they can play that bad decision forward and see the outcomes of that. They get interactive feedback along the way, nudging them in certain directions, as well as the chance to just like redo it, right? Turn back to page 3 and not fall into the quicksand in that choose your own adventure and learn sort of what they do. And so a couple, I think, important things, and we're really interested in scaling out our partnerships like on these data provenance standards curriculum for use cases that would be beneficial to your organization. And so you can think about, well, I'm not in insurance, so we can think about different use cases, and the committee has some, but we're really open to like expanding that box. right? The other is, well, maybe I need to talk to not the data procurement officer, right? But I need like legal to be on board, right, with this. So what we can also do is similar use case, but change the persona that we're simulating this path through and have these things be complementary. So teams can be on the same page about their role in supporting data provenance standards moving forward. And some of those pieces I just have on the bottom here, sort of an introduction, a brief. There's always a business objective. We're trying to make this as realistic as possible. And we always actually try to build in some collaboration where people are not just trying to make an answer, sort of make a decision and justification sort of atomized, but they're thinking about other stakeholders and other teams within an organization that they can rely on and benefit from. Next slide, please. The other thing we try to emphasize in this curriculum is not just a kind of do this mentality, but a really sort of intentional comparison. And so we have an explicit step where we debrief and reflect, right, on like sort of what was learned in the sandbox for the student. And we think this reflection, right, like often in writing, is really, really useful. And I wanted to flag one of the tools we've developed for this that we found, I think, the most useful for sort of critical thinking and adapting. Going through this curriculum in a use case is great, but people have to do it across different examples. And so we have a principles and performance matrix that is part of just about every one of our concrete curriculum, where at the end, like we ask people first to think about sort of, from what they've learned, what are the sort of qualitative people organizational principles that are out there? And that's on the x-axis there. And that can be, from high to low. It doesn't have to be a sort of quantitative score, right, necessarily. In the use case we're developing for DPS standards right now, it's about being trustworthy, right, to stakeholders and sort of measuring what you say you're measuring and not having data leakage in the underlying data we're using, for example. But we also know there is out of sample performance. There are quantitative indicators and KPIs like that are really valuable too. And so we ask people to think about those and what they've learned through the process kind of on the y-axis. And then we have these different implementations or the choice set. So using old data, using new data without deploying data provenance standards, or using new data with the data provenance standards, which can get you, right, sort of both more trust, right, if done right, and synced up with your team, as well as in this case, like better out of sample performance, right, moving to that like top right corner. But what we found is this putting things in this space, right, forces people to critically think, right, about the trade-offs of machine performance, about trust, but also their agency, right? They have choice over these things, and how do they move in the future, right, towards that like top right corner in practical use cases. And that's one of the most exciting things I think about developing curriculum like this, is sort of bringing together critical thinking, communication, and collaboration skills, with better standards and better practices that really add value to organizations. So at that, I'll throw it back to Kate. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike. That was great. Really exciting to see this work being done. If anyone else is a Pittsburgher on this call, it's really exciting to see University of Pittsburgh doing this. If anyone else is from the East Coast, thank you for taking a break from shoveling snow and ice to come join us on this call. Next slide, please, Mary Beth. All right, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes walking through some examples of these data provenance standards in practice right now. I think it's really valuable to see, now that we've given you all of this information about how the standards were formed and why, what was included in the process of making them, seeing the use case and case study with IBM, and then also having Mike walk through how this is showing up in education. Now let's see some examples of where this tool is being used in practice actively right now. So starting out with the Data and Trust Alliance, they are, again, the original group that worked on developing the data provenance standards. They developed a tool called a metadata generator. This is publicly available online to anyone. So if you search for the Data and Trust Alliance metadata generator, you'll find this online. You can create and download standardized metadata files in JSON, CSV, or CML format to meet the data provenance standards and facilitate data sharing. So this is an easy-to-use tool that they developed, basically, so you can, again, create and download those standardized metadata files in the most common formats that we see companies and enterprises using. So that's a great tool to use if you want to get a feel for seeing what the data provenance standards look like in sort of a checklist format, and seeing, getting to download that metadata file online. So again, anyone can use that. You can search for that online. Moving on to LabTrace, they're a spin out of King's College London, developed blockchain technology to authenticate, secure, and trace the life cycle of scientific and medical research data. So anyone on this call who's in medical fields, this is a really cool technology and tool that they developed that uses blockchain to trace the life cycle of data itself. So you can see the original source, you can see from point A to B to C, how it was changed. So if we started with an original data set, it moved hands and ownership, and it was changed in XYZ ways. And then it was moved hands again, changed ownership, and changed again in this set of ways. And then it was received by you. You can see the entire life cycle of where that data originated from, how it was changed. And that helps a lot in understanding what the original data set looked like, how it was changed over time, and what that means for you and the outcomes of the data you're using in your models. I'm going to hand it off to Andy to give an overview of the Blue Street Data Quality Index.
Thanks, Kate. Nice plug for the University of Pittsburgh, by the way, where Kate is a graduate, and I did my graduate work there. So nice plug. But yeah, just real briefly, Blue Street Data is a company that helps organizations manage external data as a strategic asset. At the core of that company is a platform that allows buyers and sellers of data to very easily interact, find each other, and brings transparency to price, quality, and provenance. And so how that's relevant here is that our platform generates what we call BQI score, or quality index, for each of those external data sets. And one of the things that was really important to us as we were developing our platform was to make sure that our quality index aligned very tightly with the data provenance standards. And so when data sets are evaluated and given a score, it directly gives you a sense of whether or not that company is following the data provenance standards in developing those data sets. So I think this is a good example, and I hope that as more companies are focused on these standards and the integration of data into the pipeline, that we use these types of use the standards in terms of the core pieces of the product. So I think that really shows these three examples, Kate, I think do a really great job of saying, okay, it's not just a document that we're developing that says here are the standards, that there's already organizations that are adopting them from a tool perspective and organizations from an operational perspective, as you heard Bryan say. And then when we couple all this with education, adoption becomes easier and more fluid. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, really exciting to see the data provenance standards in practice in 3 different ways. If you're looking for that standardized metadata file or standard metadata labels and fields, I'd encourage you to go look up that metadata generator. LabTrace is doing really great work with the blockchain technology, especially if you're in medical research or scientific fields. Definitely look into that. And if your company's buying data and looking to follow these standards, talk to us at Blue Street Data. Next slide, please, Mary Beth. So now that we've given you all this information on these standards, shown them in practice, I want to walk through some of the best next steps that you can take to implement these standards if you're considering implementing them. And the first of that is starting with what matters most. I think where we've heard some organizations struggle with implementing not specifically these standards, but just general, company industry-wide standards, is trying to do too much at once. The best way to get started with these standards or any other implementation of a new workflow is targeting a high risk or high value data set first. So identifying something that's high value and outcome, high risk that needs to be changed on a short timeline, and looking at what will deliver immediate results and scale adoption steps. We all know everything is easier when you have a little bit more momentum behind you. So picking something that'll have an immediate result, some sort of quantitative, tangible result to it, will help in showing the value of these data provenance standards within your organization. So Identifying those, where can you deliver ROI from implementing these standards, and where are you going to be able to show the outcome of using these standards within your organization, within your team. Start there first. Make a hierarchy of the use cases for these standards and where you can implement them. And again, start high risk or high value, and work your way down. The next best step is thinking of practical steps, including lightweight onboarding mechanisms, encouraging visibility of metadata, and normalizing provenance practices. So especially with implementing new standards across your organization, figuring out how to normalize these practices across teams and across your organization is really important. Looking at how you can make the onboarding of the standards more lightweight. So again, thinking of where is the best place to start with implementing these. Where are you going to have the least amount of friction in onboarding new standards? Is there a small pilot you can run? Is there a small team using external data or internal data that you can implement these standards with first before going organization-wide with it? And then encouraging visibility of metadata. I like to think about this culturally within organizations as well, being as open as possible with the visibility of metadata, using some of the tools that I just mentioned on the last slide, like that metadata generator with the Data and Trust Alliance. There are some ways that you can make metadata more visible, and make these standards and the sort of the ideology around these standards a little bit more familiar to people. The third step in this is foster cross-functional adoption. And Mike touched on this a little bit as well. It's really important to get multiple teams involved within this. So you want to think about engaging data teams, legal, procurement, and compliance, among others. I know Mike mentioned marketing as well. Any teams that are using data, you likely are working with legal or procurement or compliance when you're buying external data and ingesting it. Thinking about using these standards, they will be very helpful in implementation for legal, procurement, and compliance, helping to understand the source of the data and the use of it. But you want to make sure that you're looping in other teams, especially on any pilots that you're running, so that when you start to get that success and momentum building from implementing the standards, you have multiple teams involved that are watching the success of these standards happening in real time and are invested in the results and outcome of it. Again, think about those pilot programs with cross-department stakeholders. So get people involved that care about the outcomes. Think about, how is this going to benefit legal, procurement, and compliance? Will likely make their jobs a lot easier when looking at contracts from data providers for procurement, trying to compare and analyze different data providers and the cost of the data sets and the risk of the data. These standards will make all of that evaluation a lot easier for them. So pitch the pilot programs in a way that's going to make sense to those stakeholders and get them involved early on. And then elevate your supplier expectations. So once you understand, sort of the options available to you with data sets, that there's a lot higher quality that exists out there. Once you start to look into the source, provenance, and use of the data sets and the providers that those data sets are coming from, you can start to elevate your expectations of those suppliers, compare them against each other, and overall should have a lot higher quality of data, of outcomes from the data, and hopefully engagements with those providers and suppliers of data as well. Next slide, please, Mary Beth. So thinking about how to stay involved with these standards and with the work that this group is doing, and right after this we'll move on to Q&A. I saw a couple in the chat. The best ways to get involved with this group, stay up to date on the release of these standards with tools that we release around these standards for implementation. There is a data provenance standards adoption checklist, including the pilot, standards, scaling, and procurement within the data provenance standards website. You can stay engaged with us through LinkedIn, GitHub, or community participation. The best way to get involved with us is through our LinkedIn group. It's public for anyone to join. So while you're sitting on this webinar, it's the OASIS Data Provenance Standards group on LinkedIn. You can look us up there, or Mary Beth or Holly, if you have the link handy, if you want to send that link in the chat, that would be great. And that's a way where you can stay up to date with any of the announcements that come out about the work that we're doing, any new case studies or use cases that are developed, new sessions like this that happen, and any other tools that we develop through with these standards. And then for OASIS directly and to contact the TC technical committee directly, you can contact Holly Peterson, who's on this call. Her email is listed there. Yeah, so definitely get involved. Follow us on LinkedIn. We post about the work that we're doing there. Next slide, please. All right, so that brings us to the Q&A section of our webinar. As we're walking through questions, feel free to keep asking them in the Q&A with the Q&A button. I see some of the panelists already answering questions through the Q&A. That's great, guys. Keep doing that, please. Thank you. And I will start reading through our questions here. So first question to begin. How can organizations begin implementing these standards into existing complex data workflows without causing significant operational disruption? Great question. Bryan, I'm going to hand this one off to you first, and then Lisa and Andy, I think you both will have good insights for this.
So this is actually something I touched upon a little bit already. Start upon the use cases that matter most and the regulatory concerns related to sort of those data or things that matter most to your company, and look to build in capture of those sort of provenance fields as part of your model development cycles. And hopefully as that grows, and you develop repeatable solutions, you'll figure out how it could be scaled across the organization for broader uses and to include, more attributes or more complete records, especially when, resources might be limited.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer. It sort of mimics exactly what I would say. I think maybe just to round it out a little bit more, it's becoming familiar with the standards. And Kate mentioned the checklist. There's an executive briefing that you can find on our website, and starting there, it's like anything new. It's getting yourself familiar with it, understanding the value of it, and then prioritizing, as Bryan said. Looking at what gives you the biggest impact. I always like to start with do something easy, right? So show how it works. So you can do both. You can plan for the more complex and show the value, but you can start with something that's easy so that people can understand what you're doing, and then involving others within the organization, as Mike had talked about in the curriculum development. It's not just one person, somebody that's in the data science or the data side. Let's talk to procurement, let's talk to legal, let's talk to the business users of the output, so that we, everybody's familiar with the standards. And then lastly, I would just say enlist help. I mean, we're here to help. We have a great committee, great resources, and a growing community. So it's join the community, as Kate said.
And I would just follow up with looking for the pain points in your organization. All of us are trying to continue to build trust with our customers, with our employees. Data is the baseline for all of this new AI work. It's always been available to us. I'm in the privacy office at Cisco, and that's been a big piece of us, making sure we're taking care of good personal data. Customers are interested in making sure you're taking care of their data, that also not only from the sense of securing it, but making sure that the knowledge of what it can be used for and what it should not be used for is what this data provenance work allows us to capture. So as people are looking for innovative ways to add more value into their work for the customers, they know what they can and can't do with the data. So as we look at both the data in its first format, but always all the way through its lineage, it gives us that opportunity to continue to have a way to prove that we're doing what we've been asked to do for under contract, under a license, or under a regulation, all of the things that we look at as part of this overall amazing time we're in, where data is the foundation of what we do.
Thank you, three. Next question directed to Bryan. Bryan, did IBM experience any roadblocks when implementing these standards? Are there any that other organizations should be aware of? And do you have any tips to navigate around these roadblocks?
Well, I'll start by saying that whenever something new is sort of implemented at IBM, we always get pushback. But when we're developing new processes and new requirements, we always have the user in mind. So the way that this was actually instrumented and sort of put in place was not all at once. It was done incrementally over time, over about a year. And we started with the fields that were easy to capture or at least made the most sense. And as organizational knowledge sort of expanded, we aligned our intake more closely with these data provenance standards so we could have more complete records in order to make informed choices. Ultimately, the ability to get past roadblocks is just, having patience on behalf of your organization, understanding sort of use cases that your company is dealing with, and coming up with solutions that are not just suitable for legal teams or regulatory compliance, but also for the people that are building and developing these models. Ultimately, by sort of implementing these internally, you should be enabling developers to access data more easily. And in that sense, if they understand that point, hopefully they'll be a little bit more encouraged to adopt ongoing requirements to document things when they're coming in. Ultimately, a lot of things come down to organizational clarity and not redoing things or asking the same questions over and over again, which continues to be a challenge. But these standards are great. And if you ask these limited sort of 22 intake sort of queries, you're going to learn a lot about the data and you're going to sort of have an understanding as to if it's quality or not and if it's suitable for, how you want to use it.
Thank you, Brian. Great answer. Next one is directed to Lisa. For a company just starting out on this journey, should the focus be on applying these standards to all legacy data at once, or is it better to start with what matters most by targeting specific data sets first or use cases?
The second, definitely. Let's look at the high risk first. Let's look at what definitely brings in the work, the value to the company and to your customer and to your employees. Make sure that you're looking at those to bring that risk down, because everything we do is not a yes, no. It's a risk-based environment, and we want to make sure that we're focusing on it. Having the knowledge of all of our data is awesome. But, we've got to do this, as Brian says, in small bites to get to what we need. And we want to make sure we are protecting the data that we need, and both for security, but for privacy, for customer use, for all of the things that we build up that trust with each other.
Thank you, Lisa. Definitely agree with everything you said. Next question here. Are there specific open source or commercial public tools that you recommend for generating and managing these metadata files or evaluating data quality? I'm going to hand this off to Andy first, but then any other panelists that want to hop in, please feel free to.
Yeah, I think, the one slide that you went over, Kate, in terms of the data provenance standards in practice is a good one to start with. But and it sort of kind of tags into a question that we have in the chat as well from Will Fullerton. Thanks, Will. And I see Lisa, I see you're already typing, but just to add to that, I think this is something, the education of how important the standards are, not only from a development of the use of data internally as these early stage companies. The question was around how can we bring these data provenance standards into the startup ecosystem? So I think about that in two ways. One is in developing sort of products and using data and making sure that right from the start you're following the data provenance standards is important. But we also see these startups wanting to generate data to sell. And that's really an area. There's now 1,800 data providers that are commercially selling data and in volume. And, I would encourage any early stage company or any company that's looking to develop those products to start with the data provenance standards. It'll reduce the friction around selling and interaction with the buyers. And that's one of the things that we look to do at Blue Street Data, obviously, is give the providers an opportunity to showcase the quality and provenance of their data so it's transparent to buyers. And I think we need to just keep that as a central point of view for all companies working with data, whether it's building software or selling data products. But start with the standards. It'll make everybody's lives much easier.
That's great. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Lisa, for answering that question in the chat too. All right. We are a couple minutes from closing. So I just want to remind everyone the best way to stay involved is to follow this group or join this group on LinkedIn. That's where we'll post updates on the work that we're doing as a technical committee. And that's where you can find other tools that we release or resources on implementing these standards. I'm going to hand it back over to Mary Beth and Holly from the OASIS team to close out the session today.
Thanks, Kate. And thanks everybody for joining. We really appreciate it. I see some OASIS members that are attending, so thank you so much for that. And if you do want to get involved with this standard to where you're actively working with these groups and giving your input, that's amazing because the more perspective that we have when building these standards, the better that it's going to be. So if you do want to become an OASIS member, please feel free to send me an email. That does give you access to all of the technical committees that we have in addition to DPS. So I saw in the question, somebody from our PIMRIM technical committee, they're looking to collaborate with this group. So we really do try to do cross-industry collaboration as well as with other outside groups as well to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. But if you have any questions or need anything from us, please feel free to reach out. And of course, join that LinkedIn group. That'll be the quickest way to see what the group is working on.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly. And thanks to all of the panelists who joined today. Thank you to Holly and Mary Beth from OASIS for managing and creating this session today. Follow us on LinkedIn, and the recording of this will be shared with attendees afterwards. Thank you all. Stay warm if you're on the East Coast or anywhere where it's cold. And thanks again for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.